Welcome back to the Token Intelligence Show. AI is changing the way we work. And here on the Token Intelligence Show, we want to show you what the state of the art is, cut through the noise and the hype, and help you use wisdom to be a great leader in this new era that we're in. One of the topics that we've covered a lot, especially in the last couple shows, John, is that the default out-of-the-box pathway that using AI takes you down, and in the context of, sort of knowledge work supported by or outsourced to AI, is that it can actually degrade your core skill set, which is concerning. But I think that we're seeing evidence of that more and more. Let's actually start this episode by defining the term AI slop.
Okay.
It gets thrown around a lot, but I'm interested in what your definition of AI slop is.
Yeah, I think it's a relative definition, right?
Mm-hmm.
Like, it's a junk drawer term for something that was produced by AI that doesn't measure up to somebody else's standard, is what I would say.
Okay, that's good. Okay. That's interesting. My definition would be spicier.
Okay, I'm ready.
I would say that AI slop is it is output that bears the very clear markings of being machine produced, not human produced. And what's interesting is I think that definition and your definition apply across different modalities.
Yeah.
So code, we could, writing, images. I think it can sort of be applied, across the spectrum, which is really interesting. But it is highly subjective.
Yeah, because if I bring a management consulting firm, McKinsey, in and say, hey, we need a modernization roadmap for whatever.
Yep.
Versus I have, a junior level employee like, hey, can you put together a roadmap for what you think would be, the expectation of the output is different.
Yes.
Right. And I think probably rightly so, if a similar output was delivered from both people, regardless of how it happened, and say AI was involved in both, and some amount of human steering, it doesn't really matter. For sure, if McKinsey delivered something that didn't meet some sort of standard, it would be labeled AI slop, even if they did maybe have a human working on it. And then vice versa, maybe a junior person kind of outperforms, uses AI and is like, oh, this is pretty good.
Yeah, absolutely.
Okay,
the reason I wanted to try to define AI slop was, one, to just level set on that. But two, it's the first stop on our 3-stop journey today, talking about archetypes of people who use AI. And this comes from an article that you ran across in the Atlantic. So give us a quick rundown.
So I have to shout out AI Daily Brief. It's one of the top AI podcasts right now. They do just an awesome job. It's 20 minutes and do headlines and then a little bit of a deep dive on an article or a topic every day. And so they brought up, and then I found this article by David Brooks from the Atlantic.
Yep.
And he's going over these 3 archetypes. And I just thought it was really interesting because anytime you bring archetypes into the conversation, you're kind of exaggerating things that are going on, but it's really helpful to dig deep into one aspect of how AI is affecting the way we work.
Absolutely. And David Brooks is a very seasoned thinker and writer who has published many wonderful pieces over the years in the Atlantic. Very thought-provoking. So he gets a thumbs up in my book. Awesome. Of people who write things that make you think really hard, which I think is good. Whether you agree with it or not.
Yep.
So okay, let's start with the first one. Let's start with the first one. Give me the first archetype.
All right. So and I like this one. It's the productive passenger.
Okay.
It reminds me. Do you know what a passenger princess is?
No.
You've never heard that term?
Passenger princess. This is great. I'm so excited about this.
It's a funny term. I hadn't heard it until like recently. But the term is somebody like they're just along for the ride. They're not in charge. They're just like hanging out, like imagine you're on a road trip and you're just riding shotgun, doing your own thing. You're not navigating. You're not doing anything. Like just just here for the ride.
Exactly. So this is my daughters in the backseat of the car listening to K-pop Demon Hunters.
Sure. Yeah. Right. Yeah. Yeah. No, like completely clueless of like where we're going or
they
what's
could
happening.
be anywhere.
Yeah.
They could be anywhere. Yeah.
So anyways, I think when we talk about the productive passenger, that's what comes to mind a little bit. And productive, we'll see. We'll see if that's a fair term here. But I think the idea is people that are using AI with fairly low cognitive effort and then getting an output, which is pretty much determined by the AI with variable results.
Yep.
And I don't think it's always, and sometimes it works and sometimes it doesn't, right? Mm-hmm. Sometimes it's kind of that AI slop category. And sometimes like it's actually pretty good.
Yeah.
But there's going to be for sure variability.
Yep. This is what's interesting to me about the quote unquote productive passenger and interesting in general with AI. And I do have a conclusion here for people who would categorize themselves as a productive passenger, or maybe an admonition maybe is a good example.
An admonition. All right.
I think it's easy to default to thinking about the productive passenger as more of a beginner or a novice type profile, right? Like, okay, it's the junior, who's producing this report, whatever it is. But just this week, Brian Chesky, the CEO of Airbnb, which is a phenomenally successful company, got a lot of heat for posting on X and making a post on X and then adding threaded comments, as people do when they want to share a longer form thought that's not an article.
Right.
They'll sort of post like an introductory thought and then follow up with comments that sort of articulate the different points that they want to make. And it got deleted because he got a ton of heat for this being very clearly AI generated.
The initial post and the like follow up.
Yes, especially the follow up ones where it was just, it had the clear markings of being AI generated, right? What's tricky about this is that what are the hallmarks of AI generated? It's not necessarily easy to tell that, right? But I think people who have followed Brian Chesky for a long time had an innate sense that he didn't write that, right? He may have originated the thoughts, but he didn't write it, so he caught a lot of heat, right? And you're talking about someone who is an incredibly successful, incredibly articulate person, who got out of the driver's seat, got into the passenger seat, and became a productive passenger. Right?
Well, and to be fair to him, and when we go through these archetypes, it's not all or nothing. You may be a phenomenal executive that's a productive passenger in social media only. That's probably a bad idea, but just where we are right now. Right. But you could be that and be fully engaged in a different level in other aspects. And I think that's why this is tricky, because in this case, like everybody's going to kind of judge and assume that, he doesn't know what he's doing, blah, blah, blah.
Yep. I think one of the other things that makes it tricky, so it's easy to default to like, more of a beginner, less experienced person is going to be the productive passenger where they just sort of outsource it, right?
Yes.
Well, that's not necessarily the case, as we're saying.
Right.
I think the other really tricky thing is that you have these different axes of starting point and task. And so what I mean by that is the sort of core skill set that someone starts with to do a particular task. matters a lot when you think about being a productive passenger.
Right.
So, for example, let's say I think about my dad all the time because he's starting to use AI. He's 70 years old. He has his own business, and they've never really done any digital marketing.
Yeah.
So he's starting from zero. And so he's
Sure.
he's told me I'm using Claude, to generate like marketing emails, right? And so going from zero to what Claude produces is probably a win for his business, right?
For sure.
And is that AI slop, right? That's
Right.
like the difficult subjective part of it, right? But also the task of a marketing email, right, or sort of the output or that axis is much lower consequence than making a critical code change
Sure.
or in your world performing a data analysis that's
Right.
going to help someone make a strategic
Right.
decision, right? And so the threshold for the consequence relative to slop,
Right.
sort of depends. But all that to say, my admonition around the productive passenger is to spend as little time in the passenger seat as you can.
Yep.
Because I think that it is totally fair game for certain things, but for many things, especially anything where you're producing some sort of output, I think you can get dangerously close to this line where you erode your actual human input. You erode the human quality of the output by giving input and then having AI sort of produce the output, right? And so I think that anytime you feel like you're getting into the passenger seat is a really good gut check of like, am I outsourcing this in a way that is going to long-term build my skill set, let humanity shine through whatever the output is, right?
Yeah.
But I do want to qualify that by saying I think there's a whole category of stuff like research or finding information or summarizing 28 differently formatted PDFs or those sorts of things where it's like that
Right.
you outsource all of that, right? Like we don't want to go back to a world where you don't have the ability to leverage AI to automate really menial tasks like that weren't valuable for you to do in many cases anyways.
Right.
Not always, but I think in general it can be helpful.
Yeah, I think this leads us into our next one, which is the reluctant optimizer. And
why reluctant? This one's interesting to me.
Yeah, I think the reluctancy here, and not necessarily reluctance to adopt AI particularly. There could be some of that, but I think it's this. I think this is where most people are, where like, okay, my boss wants me to use AI, so maybe there's a little reluctance there. And you do it and you use it and you're like, oh, well, this is nice. But you find yourself being constantly pulled like into almost like pulled down to average, right? Because that's what I feel like one of the primary functions of AI is pulling you into average or maybe a little below average depending on what you're doing. And there's just like this convenience and like, well, it's like, I have so many things going on. Kind of like we just did a show on multitasking. This like multitasking mode combined with convenience, combined with this pull to the average that like this person essentially kind of oscillates in and out of the passenger seat, I would say. And I think some of these people have this reluctance to, because they have I think they have a little bit of recognition of this. So I think there's a bit of a reluctance to adopt this because like, I don't know, like I think maybe my work was a little better before, but if my work goes down 20% or let's call it 15% in quality and I can produce 5 times as much, like maybe it makes sense. Like I think that's the weird middle ground.
Yeah, it is. Here's a specific example of that. If you have 2 separate people who are performing the same task and they use AI to do it, when you say sort of digress to the average, right? Or get pulled towards the average. I think one way a lot of people experience that is, one, more conformity in how your craft is performed, because everyone's using the same tools, right?
You're using a word calculator, and the word calculator pulls you toward the average.
Right.
But the average is going up over time, but asymmetrically, right?
I don't know if I would agree with that.
With various model improvements. I think we see asymmetric increase in.
I think it depends on. I think what you're working on, is highly variable depending on what you're working on.
Yeah.
And I think the less subjective it is, the more I would agree with you.
Yeah.
So, for example, data analysis, code generation. I think a lot of one heuristic I've used for this in my own thinking that's been helpful is, if what is being produced is a means to another end, then I would say generally I agree that the average is going up, right? Because if you are writing code, if you are performing a data analysis, if you are proofreading a document for spelling,
Sure.
right? LLMs
or grammar.
Grammar starts to cross the line a little bit, which we can talk about.
Yeah, because there's some subjectivity in it.
But it's, an LLM is way better at proofreading for spelling than I am.
For sure.
Because it doesn't get fatigued. It has a perfect dictionary. Right. It can do it faster, right? You can write tests for all of the, all of the code that you're putting in production for a data analysis, right? And it can run those tests. And so it will be less technically error prone than a human in those particular areas.
Right.
I think where it gets very tricky, and circling back to the AI slop question, is when the output is the product itself. And this is squarely in the arena of the challenge that I face every day, working on a team of writers who are, learning to use AI in this new world that we live in, right? We're not generating code that ultimately becomes a product that someone uses in a different interface, or they're not consuming the code, right? They're consuming the product in a different way through a different surface area. And so when the output from AI is the product, that's where it gets really tricky, because as a human, you're giving it your input and it is generating the output, right? And that is what someone is consuming.
Yeah.
And so that's kind of why I say, if you have two people doing the same task, they're sort of like giving their human input, and the output will be different, but it's also creating almost more conformity in the way that happens, which is tricky. And so I definitely sense the reluctant nature of people to just outsource, right? Because mileage varies a ton on what you get on the other end.
Well, and it depends on how well can you define the output that you want, in two ways. And this could be, let's call it like a visualization or some kind of interpretation or analysis of data. It could be writing. Is it something you can tightly template? Think legal.
Yep. Standardization for sure.
Yeah, standardization, tightly template, where literally the final result is a document with blanks and guidance on what should be in each blank. And that's not just legal. There's other things that I think would be less intuitive that you could do in that way, where you'd get really good results.
Yep.
But if kind of part of the point of it is creativity, and is, pulling for the right analogies and explaining and stuff. I think that's a lot harder to get good results. We have
a mutual friend who has been extremely successful in real estate, right? And they're less day to day now, but are still a very active part of the firm that they built. And we actually talked to them about building an agent to analyze contracts, right? And one of the promises there from this person's perspective is that there is enough technical structure to a real estate contract as represented by, or as like manifestations of actual law, right?
Yeah. Yeah.
Of contractual law related to real estate transactions. Now, what's interesting is that you can create a very creative contract that is fully legal, right?
Right.
Which this guy is incredibly good at, actually. So one of the skill sets is sort of thinking out of the box. But I think that's a great example of where you can get a lot of leverage on like the technical side of it and sort of automate the pieces that, were pretty time consuming and required a lot of accuracy previously, but still have room for, sort of creativity. So it's a kind of an interesting one that's like, in the middle.
It is. All right. Our last one.
You
ready? This is the marathoner, the mental marathoner.
Mental marathoner. Ooh, I already like the sound of this.
All right. So this is a person that I don't think anybody, obviously nobody perfectly fits in these categories. And following up on our last episode about AI burnout, I think this is the group that is most likely to get burnout. But the idea is like they're in the driver's seat the whole time. They're able to accomplish more than they ever had. And they just have this kind of natural ability to drive for like long periods of time without kind of getting sucked in, pulled down to the average or pulled down to like the output that the model wants. Per se.
I have a spicy take on this one.
Okay.
I've written about this before on my blog. So I think it's easy to believe that, and I would argue even it may be one of the more natural things to believe about AI.
Right.
And it's this, that it will generally, it will create a rising tide that sort of lifts the level of knowledge work, right? In quality and quantity, ubiquitously across the board, which I don't believe to be true. What I see is that there is actually a greater divide between people who already had an extremely strong pre-existing skill set, most often combined with a strong like written or verbal skill set, for whom AI is an unbelievable multiplier. And when you combine that with a mental marathoner who has a lot of endurance to go with that, you have these people who become extraordinarily productive. Giving an average person AI doesn't even come close to producing that result. And one of the interesting reasons for this, I believe, actually, is that because the way that you interface with AI is through written or spoken word, people who have a core skill set of being articulate are naturally predisposed to being power users of AI and getting far more leverage. One of the scary things is that the literacy rate in our country is extremely low, and it's not getting better. And so what
do you mean by that?
So if you look at reading comprehension, so I actually looked up the research on this and like downloaded PDFs from organizations that do peer reviewed studies on this.
Cool.
It's hard to track I don't think there's a measure for writing skill specifically, at least that I can find.
My best proxy, like some like verbal SAT stores or something.
Reading comprehension, generally, that was what I found. This was not a full academic. I didn't deep dive into a full academic study, but these are sort of peer reviewed research. So I'll link to the blog in the show notes because I linked to the actual study. But reading comprehension is generally viewed as a proxy for sort of, we would say, like literacy, right? So competency in like literary skills, which would be reading comprehension and writing. And the more than half of the country are less than 2.5 on a 5-point scale. So like 50%, right? And so anyways, all that to say, like what's interesting is that a lot of people unfortunately lack the core skill set that they need to even at an advanced level instruct AI in a super articulate way, right? Now, over time, will they figure out affordances for that, you know, to sort of translate human intent? I don't know. But all that to say, I think the mental marathoner is actually more rare. I think that's like very rare, in terms of the distribution of these three archetypes.
Well, it's an interesting framing because it is essentially a vast amount of reading comprehension.
Yeah, it is.
It's really interesting framing.
Yeah. But the problem, as we talked about last time, is that the mental marathoners are at a huge risk of burning out because the leverage that they can get in terms of output is material.
Right.
But that also increases expectations, right? Both for yourself, like from your employer, in whatever context you're in. The other spicy take, I'm just full of spicy takes
that's
today.
The third one today.
I know. Okay. So last spicy take on this. I think for the mental marathoners, the risk, and I'm kind of speaking in many ways to you and I here because I would put us in the mental marathoner category.
On a good day.
On a good day. Yes. On a good day.
On a bad day, it is easy to get
for sure.
sucked into. But
for sure.
We aspire.
We aspire to be considered mental marathoners, I guess I would say. Maybe that was a little bit too presumptuous. I've seen you use AI though, and you're definitely a mental marathoner. But I think that the risk for the mental marathoner is that because you run at cognitive redline, it is so tempting to slip into the other archetypes, which actually begins to erode the core skill set that allowed you to be a mental marathoner in the first place, right?
Yeah.
So I guess probably the conclusion there is that balance and restraint and like boundaries are probably a good idea for the mental marathoner.
Yeah. The biggest thing that and I keep coming back to this, and I'll probably say it every single show, that I've found to be useful is not getting sucked into the chat dialogue cycle.
Yes. Yep.
I don't think I can overemphasize how important it is to spend extra time up front on defining exactly what you want and how to validate it's what you want, number one. And then two, launching a long-term process through whatever tools you're using to do whatever you want, taking space, and then evaluating the result as if it came from one of your employees.
Yep.
Like, that is what's going to work. And it does two things for you. One, I think you can get better results in general. But two, then you're set up to iterate in improving on the context and the prompting and like all of the components that go into the AI and compounding over time. Whereas if you just work synchronous with it in a session, get the thing, deliver the thing, that thing disappears, and you go do it again and again and again. Like that, I mean, that's really exhausting, and it's not compounding.
Yep. I agree.
And there's still and I think I see some of the tooling changing around, but all of the tooling right now is essentially set up for, hey, what do you want to get down right now? And then you get sucked into doing the thing, and you go back and forth, and you're like, oh, like I think I got a thing, and then that thing disappears, and you go back a month later to do that same thing. You're like, I don't remember where that was, and you start over. I mean, you're kind of set up for that right now.
Yeah, for sure. I think another really important thing to remember is that the user engagement rates are a real thing that real people are accountable for.
Mm-hmm. Well, the people, I mean, that's the type of information you report to your investors. For example.
And I don't say that in any way as a, like conspiracy theory, anything of that nature, but it's just the way that it's just the way that these businesses are set up, right? And I think it's healthy to acknowledge that that's not always necessarily the best outcome, right? And I think,
Right.
if we look at things like social media, right, and sort of some of the psychological problems that are associated with that, if sort of taken to the extreme, an algorithm that's designed to keep your attention will keep your attention, if you let it over time. And so one of my takeaways from what you said is, show restraint and use the tool with intention, as opposed to just following the path of least resistance.
Yeah.
All right. Well, thanks for joining us on the Token Intelligence Show, and we'll catch you on the next one.